The moment that restaurant number flashed on my phone, I felt something in my spirit tighten, because calls like that do not come unless truth is about to break something wide open. And honey, when they said, "You need to see the footage, come alone and do not tell your husband," I knew right then that my peace was about to walk into a fight it never asked for. Baby, let me tell you something about life. It does not always whisper, sometimes it slaps the table, grabs your attention and says, "Wake up, child," before you lose yourself trying to protect someone who wouldn't even tell you the truth. Now when that restaurant called me talking about I needed to come alone, I knew two things were possible. Either I was about to see something that broke me, or I was about to learn something that built me. And in this life both are blessings if you know how to stand tall after the shaking stops. So sit down, grab you some water and listen close, because this story right here carries lessons that save hearts before hearts get dragged into storms they never caused. When the world warns you, it is not always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it is a small shift in the air that makes your skin tighten, or a change in a person's tone that whispers, "Pay attention." Even before that restaurant called, I felt something in the pit of my stomach, a quiet pressure chewing at the edges of my peace. Something inside me kept trying to speak, but I kept pushing it aside, telling myself that I was overthinking or being too sensitive. The truth is, we often silence our own inner alarms because we are afraid of what they might reveal. We choose comfort over clarity, even when that comfort is built on fragile sand. So when that phone rang and the voice on the other side spoke with that serious weight, I knew this was no ordinary call. There is a special kind of silence that falls over you when a stranger says, "You need to see the footage, come alone and do not tell your husband." That is not a sentence you hear in regular life. That is a sentence that opens a door you did not want to walk through but now cannot close. You might think you will freeze or panic, but baby, let me tell you something. When the truth calls your name, something inside you stands up, even if your hands are shaking. I stood there holding the phone, feeling the air thicken around me, and all the memories of the past few months started to swirl. The late nights, the excuses, the strange mood shifts, the things I had brushed away because I wanted to believe we were fine. It is funny how the mind collects clues long before the heart is willing to look at them, and every clue I had ignored came crawling back like shadows, demanding to be seen. The human heart is a stubborn little thing. It will cling to hope even when reality is tapping its foot, saying, "Child, be serious." Still, there was this deeper instinct inside me that said, "Listen to the warning," because warnings are gifts even when they arrive wrapped in fear. A warning is the universe telling you that the ground you're standing on might break if you keep pretending nothing is wrong. I did not want to admit that, but I could not deny that my spirit felt unsettled. And when your spirit is unsettled, baby, that is not paranoia, that is intuition, that is wisdom, that is protection. I remember standing by the window looking out at the street, not even seeing anything specific, just trying to steady my breath. That call echoed in my mind again and again, the tone, the urgency, the care, the concern in that woman's voice. She did not sound like someone trying to start trouble. She sounded like someone trying to stop a bigger trouble from swallowing me whole. There is a difference between messy people who stir chaos for sport and people who warn you because they see the storm you cannot see. In this call, it was not messy, it was mercy. The hardest part of listening to a warning is admitting that something might actually be wrong. It forces you to face the parts of your life you hoped were safe. I kept thinking, maybe this is nothing, maybe this is a misunderstanding, maybe I should not go, maybe I am making a big deal out of nothing. But baby, denial is comfortable until it is deadly, and deep in my chest I knew that if I ignored this warning I would regret it. I would lose more than I was ready to lose. The weight of that possibility pushed me to move. But even before I left the house, something powerful happened inside me. You know that moment when your senses sharpen and every step you take feels heavier? That is your inner wisdom taking the wheel. That is your strength waking up from a long nap. That is the part of you that refuses to be fooled any longer. I realized that the truth does not always scream. Sometimes it whispers so softly that you must be quiet enough and brave enough to hear it. And that day I heard it loud enough to shift my entire world. On the way to that restaurant, the air felt thick, like it was carrying secrets. Every sound felt louder, every pause felt longer. My mind was racing, but my heart was strangely steady, because once you decide to listen, once you decide to honor your inner warning, something inside you settles. You do not feel safe, but you feel aligned. You do not feel calm, but you feel ready. And readiness is a kind of courage even when you are terrified. As I walked into that restaurant, I felt every eye, every step, every memory pressing on me. The staff looked at me with this gentle seriousness, like they already knew what I was walking toward. And that is when it hit me. People who witness the truth before you often carry the burden of deciding whether to tell you or stay silent. And when they choose to tell you, they are choosing your dignity over your comfort. They are choosing your future over the temporary ease of minding their own business. Their warning is not weakness, it is protection. The manager approached me with a look I will never forget. Her eyes were soft but firm, like she knew my heart was about to collide with something heavy. She walked slowly like she did not want to startle me. She said the words again, "You need to see this," and in that moment my entire world shrank to the size of a single breath. It felt like the universe pressed pause on everything around me. The lights, the movement, the noise, all of it faded until all that was left was the truth waiting quietly in a back room. When someone warns you like that, you do not just hear their words, you feel the weight of everything behind them. You feel the sincerity, you feel the urgency, you feel the care, because people do not call you with that kind of message unless they know what they are about to show you might break your heart, and people do not risk getting involved unless they believe you deserve to know the truth. Standing there in that small room, I realized something powerful. Warnings are not signs of weakness. Warnings are signs of love. Sometimes the world loves you enough to shake you awake before you walk into a fire. Sometimes strangers become guardians, and every quiet whisper your heart felt before suddenly makes sense. The unease, the tension, the suspicion, the fear, it was all leading to this moment, the moment where the truth could no longer be hidden. And here is the deepest part of it all. Listening to a warning requires humility. You have to set aside your pride, your hopes, your fantasies. You have to be willing to accept that what you want may not match what is real, but that humility protects you, it saves you, it prepares you for whatever comes next, because ignoring a warning does not stop the truth, it only delays the heartbreak. So when the world warns you, child, listen, not because you are weak but because you are wise, not because you expect the worst but because you deserve the truth, not because the warning is comfortable but because silence would hurt more. And that day in that restaurant I learned that warnings are not interruptions, they are invitations, invitations to clarity, invitations to strength, invitations to freedom. And baby, when the world whispers like that, you better listen every single time. Pain exposes what you have been pretending not to notice long before you are ready to face it, and that truth can shake the strongest person to the core, because pain is not just a feeling, it is a messenger. It arrives when something inside you has been whispering for far too long and you kept brushing it aside, hoping silence would somehow fix what was broken inside your life. Pain does not visit without purpose. It comes when your heart has been carrying unspoken truths and your mind has been rearranging excuses to protect a picture that has already begun to fade. When I walked out of that restaurant room after watching the footage, it was not the images that haunted me, it was the sudden clarity about how much I had ignored inside myself. I realized that the pain I felt in that moment had been living with me for months. It had been sitting in my chest waiting for me to stop pretending everything was fine. I remembered the nights when the house felt heavier than usual, when conversations felt forced, when smiles felt thin, when I asked him simple questions like "How was your day?" and he answered with one-word responses that landed like cold droplets of rain on a window. The truth is, I had felt the distance long before it became undeniable, but I convinced myself it was temporary, that it would pass, that love would fix it somehow. That is the dangerous thing about hope. Hope is beautiful, but it can also blind you if you use it to hide from reality. I kept hoping things would get better, so I ignored the pain that kept tapping my shoulder, nudging my ribs, whispering, "You know something is wrong, child." But I told myself, maybe I am just being dramatic, maybe every relationship goes through phases, maybe this is normal. But deep down I knew it was not normal, and the pain knew it too. Pain always knows what we refuse to acknowledge. When you live with someone, you can feel the shift before you understand it. You can sense when their attention drifts, when their heart becomes occupied elsewhere, when their energy pulls away piece by piece. And I had felt it. It was in the way he avoided my eyes, it was in the way he hesitated before touching me, like he was debating whether affection was still necessary. It was in the quiet moments when I sat beside him and felt like a ghost living in a home where I used to be seen. But I ignored those moments because admitting them felt like admitting defeat, and I was too loyal, too committed, too determined to force things to work even when they had stopped working long ago. Pain had been whispering all this time, through headaches, through sleepless nights, through that constant tightness in my chest, through that anxious feeling that never quite left. Yet I kept silencing it because acknowledging the pain meant acknowledging that something precious was slipping away, and I was not ready for that truth. Pain has a strange way of growing quietly. In the beginning it is soft, it is a tiny pressure, a small discomfort, an uneasy feeling, but when you refuse to listen it grows louder. It begins to echo through your thoughts, it begins to color your days with heaviness, it begins to shape your decisions without you realizing it. Pain becomes your shadow, walking beside you, waiting for the day you finally turn around and see it fully. After watching the footage I realized that every quiet moment of tension, every argument that never got resolved, every unanswered question every strange behavior I brushed aside was pain trying to warn me I had been living in a state of almost aware that he had changed, almost aware that our relationship was not the same, almost aware that I was holding onto a rope he had already let go of, almost aware that the love I thought was mutual had become a one-sided effort. I kept hoping honesty would return, but instead the silence grew thicker, the distance grew wider, and the pain grew sharper. There were moments I used to stand in the bathroom with the door closed pretending to fix my hair while tears threatened to spill because I felt something was wrong, but I could not explain it to anyone, not even to myself. I kept telling myself it was stress or fatigue or life, yet every time he walked past me without looking, every time he answered me without warmth, every time he withdrew a little more, the pain inside me tightened just a little bit more, but I ignored it because ignoring felt easier than breaking open the truth. Pain exposes the truth not to punish you but to protect you, because you cannot heal from what you refuse to see, you cannot change what you pretend is fine, you cannot save a relationship that only one person is fighting for, and I had been fighting alone for far too long. The footage did not create pain, it confirmed it put a spotlight on everything I had been trying to keep in the dark. Pain had been waiting for this moment because it needed me to finally admit what I already knew deep down. The hardest part of facing pain is realizing that the signs were there long before the explosion. We always think heartbreak begins in one dramatic instant, but it never does. Heartbreak begins quietly. It begins the first time you excuse rudeness. It begins the first time you accept less effort than you deserve. It begins the first time you feel lonely next to someone who promised to love you. Pain grows in every moment where you shrink yourself to avoid conflict, in every moment where you pretend his distance is temporary, in every moment where you swallow your questions because you fear the answer. As I stood outside that restaurant trying to gather myself, I felt the weight of every ignored truth collapse onto me. My mind replayed conversations where I sensed something was off but convinced myself otherwise. My heart replayed moments where his affection faded but I blamed myself rather than seeing the truth. Pain said, see, you knew, you always knew, and that is the worst part of it, not the betrayal itself but the moments you buried your own intuition to protect someone who did not protect you. Pain exposes the reality that love cannot survive on one person's effort alone. It exposes the fact that loyalty without reciprocity is just self-sacrifice. It exposes the truth that sometimes you stay because you fear change, not because the relationship still feeds your spirit. It exposes the fact that you were holding on to memories, not the present moment, because the present moment had already left you. The footage was just the proof. The pain was the witness. And I was the one who refused to listen until the evidence became undeniable. But here is the powerful thing about pain: once it exposes the truth, it gives you a choice. You can either let it break you or let it build you. I realized in that moment that pain was not my enemy, it was my guide. It was the part of me that refused to let me keep living in illusions. It was the part of me that demanded I reclaim my worth. Pain said, child, this is not punishment, this is awakening. You have been asleep inside a relationship that stopped nourishing you long ago. Wake up and walk forward. Pain is loud because it wants you to choose yourself. Sometimes you need your heart to break open so your vision can clear. Sometimes you need the truth to sting so your strength can rise. Sometimes you need the hurt to push you out of situations you would never voluntarily leave, because we cling to things long after they stop being good for us, and pain is the force that pushes us toward freedom when we are too loyal to walk away on our own. I learned that pain is not a sign of weakness. Pain is evidence of how deeply you cared, how deeply you loved, how deeply you tried. It is proof of your humanity. It is proof that your heart was fully invested even when the other person's heart wandered. Pain does not make you foolish. Pain makes you real. Pain makes you honest. Pain makes you grow in ways comfort never could. And so that day I let the pain speak. I let it show me every moment I had been overlooking. I let it reveal what my heart already knew. I let it teach me that ignoring pain does not make it disappear, it only delays the truth. And when the truth arrives, it always arrives louder, stronger, and more undeniable than ever before. That is what pain does. It exposes everything you pretended not to notice but needed to see, so you can finally choose yourself again. Loyalty is a blessing until it becomes self-betrayal, and baby, the truth hits you like a quiet thunderstorm, one that does not roar on the outside but shakes your soul from the inside out. I used to think loyalty meant staying no matter what, holding on no matter how hard things became, giving and giving even when I had nothing left to give. I thought loyalty was the glue that kept love together, but standing there after seeing that footage I realized something painful yet necessary. Loyalty without balance is not loyalty, it is bondage. It is a chain you wrap around your own heart while calling it commitment. For so long I kept choosing him even when he stopped choosing me. I told myself that relationships take effort and patience and time, and that is true, but what I forgot is that effort should not be one-sided, patience should not feel like punishment, and time should not be something only one person is investing. I kept thinking that if I just loved him harder, if I supported him more, if I stayed quiet during the moments that hurt me, then somehow everything would fall back into place. But all that happened was that I kept disappearing piece by piece while he continued living as though my loyalty was guaranteed. There is a dangerous kind of love that grows when you keep giving without receiving. It feels noble at first, it feels strong, it feels like sacrifice in the name of love, but over time it starts to drain your spirit, it starts to dim your light, it starts to chip away at the parts of you that once felt whole, and before you know it you are standing in a life that looks familiar but feels foreign because the version of you living in it is no longer the version you were meant to be. I used to wake up every day thinking, if I can just be more patient, if I can just stay supportive, if I can just overlook the small hurts, then maybe he will come back emotionally and mentally, maybe he will remember who we used to be, maybe he will remember the love we built. But the truth is, you cannot bring someone back to a relationship they already abandoned in their heart, and I had been loyal to an idea, not a reality. I had been loyal to a memory, not the present moment. Loyalty becomes self-betrayal the moment you stay in a situation that stops honoring who you are, and the hardest part is that self-betrayal does not show up all at once. It sneaks in slowly. It shows up the first time you quiet your discomfort to keep the peace. It shows up the first time you feel disrespected but let it slide because you want to avoid an argument. It shows up every time you apologize for things you did not do just to smooth over tension. It shows up every moment you ignore your own needs because his needs feel louder. I remember moments where I sat across from him at dinner and he barely spoke. I could feel the distance like a fog sitting between us. Instead of asking for more connection, I convinced myself that I was asking for too much. Instead of acknowledging the pain, I told myself it was just a phase. Instead of naming the truth, I swallowed it because I thought silence would protect our peace, but silence did not protect anything. Silence only protected his comfort and erased mine. I saw the change in him long before I accepted it. I saw the way his phone became more interesting than our conversations. I saw the way he pulled away when I reached for him. I saw the way he never asked how I was doing unless it was convenient for him. But I kept telling myself that loyalty meant staying through rough seasons. What I did not understand was that a rough season only counts when both people are trying. If only one person is still fighting, then it is not a season, it is a slow surrender, and I was the only one who had not surrendered. The footage showed me something I had not admitted out loud. I was loyal to him, but he was loyal to the attention he received elsewhere. I was loyal to the love we once had, but he was loyal to the thrill of something new. I was loyal to the relationship, but he was loyal to the ego boost he got from being desired by someone who required nothing from him. And that is when I realized loyalty without boundaries is not devotion, it is self-neglect. I used to think walking away meant quitting, but standing there I realized staying when nothing is changing is what truly breaks a person. I had been breaking myself hoping to keep something whole that was not whole anymore. Loyalty should never cost you your self-respect. Loyalty should never silence your needs. Loyalty should never feel like you are constantly trying to prove your worth to someone who has already stopped seeing you. The moment I realized this, my heart felt heavy but clearer. I saw how many times I had shown up for him without him ever showing up for me. I saw how many times I defended him to others even when he would not defend me. I saw how many times I settled for crumbs hoping he would bring back the full meal, but baby, crumbs are not love. Crumbs are leftovers from someone who no longer wants to feed you. The real lesson I learned is this: loyalty is not noble when it empties you. Loyalty is not strength when it hurts you. Loyalty is not love when it requires you to abandon yourself. I had been loyal to him but disloyal to me, and that is the kind of self-betrayal that steals your identity without you noticing, until one day you wake up and realize you no longer recognize the person staring back at you in the mirror. After watching that footage, I felt something inside me shift, something strong, something fierce, something honest. I realized that my loyalty had been a one-sided story and I was the only one turning its pages. He had closed the book long before I even noticed, and that truth hit me, but it also freed me because once you see the truth clearly you cannot return to blindness. I stood outside that restaurant feeling the weight of every moment I had ignored, every red flag I had justified, every instinct I had dismissed, and for the first time I asked myself, why am I being loyal to someone who would not walk across the room for me? Why am I sacrificing my peace for someone who cannot even give me honesty? Why am I staying in a place where my heart feels smaller and smaller each day? And the answer was simple but hard. I was afraid to start over, afraid to face the truth, afraid to be alone, afraid to admit that I deserved better. But fear is not a good reason to stay in a place that keeps breaking you. Fear traps you. Loyalty frees you only when it is mutual. Support only matters when it flows both ways. Love only heals when it is balanced. And I finally understood that staying loyal to the wrong person is the fastest way to betray the right person yourself. Loyalty should make you feel safe, not depleted, loved, not overlooked, supported, not exhausted, inspired, not invisible. And once I realized that, my heart began to reclaim its strength. I understood that the version of me that kept shrinking to keep him comfortable did not deserve to stay in that place any longer. I deserved a life where my loyalty was honored, not exploited. I deserved a love where my effort was matched, not taken for granted. I deserved to be with someone who valued my presence instead of assuming I would never leave. Loyalty is a blessing, but only when it is shared, and the day I saw that footage was the day I stopped betraying myself in the name of loyalty, because choosing someone else at the cost of losing yourself is not love, it is abandonment, and I refused to keep abandoning myself to protect someone who did not protect me. That moment was the beginning of my rise. It was the beginning of my healing. It was the moment I reclaimed my worth and remembered that loyalty is powerful, but only when you give it to someone who deserves it, and that someone has to include you too. Key point 5 is the moment where you learn to speak your truth even when your voice shakes, because there comes a time in every woman's life when silence stops feeling like peace and starts feeling like prison, and I need you to understand what that day felt like for me, because it was the day I finally stopped trying to protect a man who did not think twice about breaking me, and I stopped trying to smile through storms I never created, and I stopped pretending that I was okay with being treated like an afterthought in a life I helped build. And that shift did not come gently. It did not arrive with soft words and warm reassurances. It came like thunder, with a warning that if I did not stand up for myself right now, I would lose myself forever. And once a woman realizes she is on the edge of losing her own spirit, she becomes dangerous, because she finally remembers she deserves more and she starts acting like it. And that is exactly what happened to me when the restaurant called and everything began unraveling faster than I could process. I remember sitting in my car gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my hands ached, because the truth they showed me had landed in my chest with the weight of 1,000 bricks, and all I could hear was the voice of the woman on the phone saying, "Do not tell your husband, come alone, you need to see this footage." And I remember thinking to myself, why does she sound worried? Why does her voice carry that tone, like she knows something I do not? And then the footage revealed what my intuition had been whispering to me for months, and suddenly my world was spinning like nothing made sense anymore. And I walked out of that restaurant with my heart crumbling in slow motion, but my pride rising like smoke, because betrayal has a way of waking up a part of you that you did not even know had been asleep all those years. And as painful as it was, part of me felt like I had just been shaken awake by reality itself. When I walked into that house later that evening, everything felt heavier than usual, the walls, the air, the silence, and he looked at me with that same careless expression, like he had done nothing wrong, like he had no idea what I had just seen. And something in me snapped, but not in an angry, screaming, breaking dishes kind of way. No, it snapped in the quiet, powerful way that women do when they have reached the point of no return, that moment when the numbness wears off and clarity hits like cold water on warm skin. And I decided I was done shielding him from the consequences of his own choices. I was done shrinking my voice so his ego could breathe. I was done burying my feelings under excuses that were never good enough to justify how deeply he had hurt me. So I sat him down, and for the first time in years I let my truth come out, without trying to soften it, without trying to wrap it in politeness, without putting his comfort above my hurt. And my voice shook, because honesty always shakes the first time you let it out after a long period of silence. But I kept going. I told him what I saw. I told him how I felt. I told him what it did to me to watch the person I trusted most behave like a stranger behind my back. And for the first time ever, he did not have a script ready. He did not have excuses lined up. He did not have that dismissive smile he usually used to shut down any confrontation. He just sat there staring at me like he realized I was not the same woman he could manipulate with half apologies and temporary promises, because now I was looking straight at him with eyes that had finally seen the truth, and I was speaking from a place that fear could not reach anymore. While I talked, I felt something already starting to heal inside me, because speaking your truth does that. It opens space for your soul to breathe again. It unclogs the pain. It releases the weight that you have been carrying in secret for far too long. And the more I spoke, the lighter I felt, the more confident I became, the more certain I was that my voice mattered, and that I had been quiet for too long in a relationship that expected my silence as part of the deal. And let me tell you something, once a woman realizes she is allowed to take up space, everything changes. The entire atmosphere of the room shifts. shifts, the balance of the relationship shifts, the power structure shifts, and there is no going back to the old version of her because that version only existed to survive, not to live. He tried eventually to interrupt me, he tried to twist my words, he tried to switch roles like he was the one who was wounded and betrayed, but this time I cut right through it and I said, no, we are not doing that, not today, not ever again. And for the first time he understood that he was not dealing with the same version of me, the one he could silence with guilt or gaslighting or changing the subject. I was done playing the role he had assigned me, I was rewriting myself in real time, and the shock on his face told me he had underestimated the power of a woman who finds her voice after losing her illusions. My truth kept coming like a river that had been held back by a dam too fragile to hold any longer. I told him every moment I had felt alone, even while standing next to him, every time I had swallowed my pain just to keep peace, every instance where I had carried the weight of the relationship while he wandered through life believing he was the one keeping it together. And I told him how deeply it hurt to realize that while I was out here building a life with loyalty and devotion, he was out there treating the relationship like an optional accessory and then expecting gratitude for the bare minimum. And the more I spoke, the more obvious it became that he had never expected me to confront him with this level of clarity, because when you speak from a wounded place people think they can dismiss you as emotional, but when you speak from a healed place every word lands with undeniable impact. After I finished talking, the silence between us was thick like the air before a storm, and he stared at me like he finally understood that the version of me he took for granted had died in that restaurant when I watched that footage, and now he was sitting across from a woman who had resurrected herself through the very pain he caused. And while he searched for something to say, something to fix, something to reverse the damage, I had already made peace with a truth that would shape the rest of my life, which was that once a woman speaks her truth without fear, she becomes unstoppable and untouchable and unbreakable, and she never again allows anyone to treat her like she is easy to replace. So yes, that day hurt, yes it shook me, yes it shattered whatever illusions I had left, but it also gave me back something far more important. It gave me my voice, it gave me my backbone, it gave me the courage to say I deserve better, and mean it not with anger but with quiet steady self-worth. And that is the moment every woman must face at least once, the moment where she speaks her truth even if her voice trembles, because the trembling is not weakness, it is transformation. It is the sound of a woman rising from the ashes of someone else's lies and becoming stronger than she ever imagined she could be. Key point 6 is the moment when you stop needing closure from the person who hurt you and start giving closure to yourself, because sometimes the final chapter is not a conversation or an apology or a confession from the person who caused the pain. Sometimes the final chapter is you standing in your own truth, knowing that you are done even if they are not ready to admit what they did. And this shift happens quietly but powerfully, like a sunrise that does not ask permission to rise, it just does. And that is exactly what I felt in the days after everything came crashing down, because once I had spoken my truth, once I had released all the weight that had been sitting on my chest for months, I realized something shocking. I no longer needed him to understand me in order for me to heal. I no longer needed his remorse to feel free. I no longer needed him to validate the pain he caused, because the moment I looked at the truth with my own eyes, the healing began with or without him. The next morning after that conversation, I remember waking up with a strange mix of heaviness and clarity, my heart still bruised but my spirit somehow lighter, as if the universe had quietly removed chains I did not notice were tightening around me, until the moment they finally snapped and the house felt different too, not because anything had changed physically but because I was no longer walking around that space as a woman hoping to be treated right. I was walking around as a woman who finally realized that she deserved love that did not require her to beg for honesty or loyalty. And that realization is the kind of shift you cannot reverse. Once it happens forever. You see, closure is not about getting the truth from someone who has spent months or years hiding it. Closure is not about forcing someone to admit what you already know. Closure is not even about hearing them say sorry. Closure is simply about deciding that your peace matters more than their explanations. And I finally understood that as the hours passed, because he kept pacing around the house trying to explain himself, trying to rewrite the story, trying to twist timelines, trying to justify what he did with excuses that sounded weaker each time he repeated them, but something inside me had gone quiet and strong at the same time, and I realized I no longer cared about his version of events, because I had seen enough to know the truth, and more importantly I had seen enough to know that his behavior was not about me. It was not about my worth, it was not about my effort, it was not about my love, it was about him and the things inside him that he had never bothered to fix. When a woman reaches this point, she stops playing detective, she stops begging for honesty, she stops combing through conversations trying to find the missing pieces, she stops asking why, because she realizes that closure does not come from the mouth of the one who broke her. Closure comes from the moment she stops needing answers she already knows the truth to, and that truth is simple. People who love you do not put you in the position to question your own value. People who love you do not betray you and then expect you to carry the weight of their mistakes. People who love you do not watch you crumble under the pain they caused and then offer you half apologies expecting you to smile through the damage. That morning I made myself tea and sat by the window watching the sun climb over the horizon, and something inside me settled. For the first time in a long time I felt grounded in myself, rooted in my worth, aware that the woman I was becoming no longer needed the approval of a man who did not know how to love with integrity. And as he moved around the house trying to get me to react, trying to stir my emotions, trying to pull me back into the cycle of arguments, interpretations and emotional confusion, I stayed calm, absolutely calm, because once you realize your heart no longer belongs in the hands of someone careless, you stop reaching for them, you let go naturally, without drama, without explosions, without begging. It is like releasing something that has been heavy for so long that you forgot what it felt like to breathe normally. The next few days were strangely peaceful, not because the situation was easy but because clarity brings a quiet strength, and with that strength comes the ability to make decisions without fear. And I started seeing everything differently. I started noticing all the moments in the past where I had tried to hold things together on my own. I started remembering all the conversations where I had minimized my own hurt just to keep him comfortable. I started recognizing all the times I brushed off my instincts because I did not want to believe the truth my heart had sensed long before my eyes confirmed it, and in that recognition came forgiveness, not for him but for myself. Forgiveness for staying when I should have walked away, forgiveness for believing his excuses, forgiveness for silencing my intuition, forgiveness for thinking that love meant sacrificing myself until there was nothing left of me. Self-forgiveness is the most powerful closure of all, because once you forgive yourself, the guilt disappears, and when guilt disappears, love returns, the love you had for yourself before you allowed someone else to chip away at it piece by piece until you barely recognized the woman in the mirror. But that morning I recognized her again, and she looked like someone who was done settling, someone who was done waiting, someone who was ready to pick herself up and walk forward even if the path ahead was uncertain, because the unknown with peace is better than the familiar with pain. He of course tried everything: denial, anger, charm, guilt, silence, and then more explanations, but nothing worked because the truth had already settled in my heart, and once the truth settles nothing can uproot it. And I realized he was not fighting for me, he was fighting for control, he was fighting to keep the comfort I had always given him, he was fighting because he knew that once I made up my mind to walk away he no longer had access to the version of me he had taken for granted, and that scared him more than losing the relationship itself. But his fear was no longer my responsibility, his healing was no longer my project, his behavior was no longer my burden. Closure came the moment I understood that leaving was not about punishing him, it was about saving me, and once that clicked there was no more confusion, no more hesitation, no more bargaining with myself about whether I should stay. The answer was clear as daylight. I chose me, I chose my peace, I chose my dignity, I chose my future, and I chose to never again walk into a restaurant or a home or a relationship where I had to doubt the person who claimed to love me. And that is the beauty of real closure. It is not loud, it is not dramatic, it does not require a final showdown, it simply happens quietly inside you when your heart decides it is done hurting and ready to heal. And that day I understood the most important lesson of all: sometimes the closure you are searching for is just the moment you finally tell yourself the truth and allow yourself to walk away, not broken but reborn, stronger, wiser, and absolutely unwilling to settle for anything less than the love and respect you deserve.